Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. So today I'm delighted to join by Rita Soronen. She is the president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation. And I'm absolutely delighted to have you on the show. And thank you for making time for us today. We've been juggling diaries and hoping to get you involved, and eventually you're here. So I'm really delighted to have you.
Goodness, Simon, I'm so excited to be talking to you, and especially as we do it from such great distance, and it seems like we're right next door. So this is lovely.
Yeah, we were just listeners. Rita was just telling me that she had COVID a couple of weeks ago, and so if she's coughed, she's still got a little bit of a tickle going on. So for me, if there is a silver lining to COVID, has been this mass uptake of Zoom. Which means that, without Zoom, we wouldn't be doing all this podcast. And I often wish I'd come up with the idea of the podcast earlier, but I think that it wouldn't have taken off because people just weren't as comfortable as working with Zoom as they are now. So if there is a silver lining, then that's one of those. We hear so much about the negative stuff and the sense of isolation that people felt during COVID, but I think Zoom isn't as good clearly as face to face. But a plane ticket to Columbus, Ohio, would be, I'm guessing, I don't know, $1,500, £1,200 or something like that. So, and all the time involved. So anyway, let's get into this. So Rita, what comes to your mind when you hear this phrase, the name of the podcast, Thriving Adoptees?
It's such a great question, and it's such a perfect title because the dynamics of adoption and the dynamics of children who have been adopted and families who have stepped into the world of adoption are just different. It's a different way to create or expand a family, and understanding those dynamics helps, I think, adoptees do exactly what your title says. Thrive in the way that they deserve, thrive in the way that they can, and thrive to the best advantage of who they are as humans. So I love this title. I love that the positive spin, it's about thriving, but underneath that thriving is addressing what can sometimes be challenges or dynamics or nuances that are different from a family that's formed through birth.
Yeah, there's so much there. I think for me, the thing that I often come back to is this idea that thriving, or perception that thriving means everything in the garden is rosy. No, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actually getting through the tough stuff.
Yes.
I'm not putting some kind of Pollyanna-ish approach on this. It is, for me, it is dealing, if we're okay, people, this sounds a little bit wacko, but bear with me. If we're okay with not feeling okay, we're always okay. This idea that we're supposed to be happy all the time doesn't seem to be consistent with the human experience. It's only true on some parts of social media, and then what happens is we kind of we compare ourselves. People edit the edited show reels, the edited highlights of people's life, and we compare our insides with their outsides, and they're feeling exactly the same. They're going through some tough stuff, whatever the cause of that tough stuff might be. So yeah, thriving doesn't mean that there's never any tough stuff.
No, it's a great point, because we hit a point here at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption very early on where people would say, oh, love solves everything, right? Just get these kids into a loving family, and then boom, that's the exclamation mark at the end of the sentence. And we've come a long way from the early days of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption when we say, no, it's a comma in the sentence, because it's love is what we all thrive on, love is what we all need, but love does not answer the question of what are the particular needs and issues and challenges that still exist with the child, particularly with our focus, children who are adopted from foster care. So absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more. Thriving means, access to resources, access to people that can help through challenges, access to understanding what it is that's going on in particularly a teenager's mind who's been adopted from foster care and has experienced extraordinary things in their lives already. Absolutely, I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah. I love you talked about you said understanding the dynamics, which I think is really useful, because the word dynamics, we're talking about a process here, and we're talking about shift over time, and that is the exact opposite of the once and done approach.
Yes.
We talked about I'm not sure, did you say full point or exclamation mark? It's like they're in love, then they're in the family, then that's it. And clearly we're talking about a process over time. So the slightly funny thing that pops into my head is, even at 55, my mum still tells me to drive carefully, and tells me to not to work too hard, or to, she's still fretting, right? Yep. She's still fretting over me at 55 years after the adoption. So it is dynamics, and it's a process. And interestingly, did a recording yesterday about the teenage years, which when there is a particularly challenging for everybody, and then the kind of adoption issues get kind of merged in with hormonal adolescence, and in any one individual, it's impossible to separate those two things. And I often hear adoptive parents getting themselves wrapped around an axle, trying to identify whether this is a human issue or whether it's an adoption issue.
Yes.
And to a certain extent, I don't really like hearing this, but it doesn't really matter, I don't think.
Exactly.
It's dealing with what's in hand.
Exactly. I think it's about recognizing that those layers are there. Look, teenagers are challenging creatures based on the stage of development, no matter what. When you add to that layers of trauma, layers of grief, layers of loss, no matter if this is a child that was adopted as an infant or a child adopted out of foster care, all of those are mixed into that natural age and stage development. And you're right. I think it's a fool's game to try and say, well, that's because they're just a teenager and it's normal development, or that's because they were adopted and they're still dealing with grief and loss. It's the understanding that those all coexist.
Yeah. And I think if I can speak from my own experience, me trying to understand my behavior, right? Okay. If I'm trying to pin the tail on the donkey, I tend to overthink that.
Sure.
Because it's an answer that can't be resolved, it tends to take up a lot of headspace, and it's a big distraction. So I can only imagine, not being an adoptive parent, that it's going to do the same to that. When we're uncertain, when we're trying to figure stuff out, whoever we are, trying to figure stuff out is often a fruitless task, and we're better just focusing on the task at hand rather than trying to find some sort of attribution, which is never going to be possible. Right. We're never going to know.
Right, unless it is a very specific mental health issue that needs addressing, a very specific physical issue that needs addressing, of course, then you want to parse that out. But that you would be doing that if it were a biological child or an adopted child. So it's about understanding that sometimes the root of whatever the issue is, it isn't as important as what are you going to do in order to address it.
Yeah, for me, it's a lot of looking back. Funnily enough, I do a little bit. I don't know, maybe it's just because I'm 55. I do a little bit more looking back than I used to do. I used to be very forward focused, but now I just look at it. But it doesn't really. It just churns up and it doesn't get me very far. Anyway, that's just me.
Yeah.
So we picked up. I picked up on the word that you used, dynamic. So we're talking about a process going forward, and the other key word that I loved about what you said. You said about understanding the dynamics.
Yes.
So essentially, what the podcast is all about is understanding the dynamics of adoption and how that plays out. So, what of the key learnings or the key shifts in your understanding that you've seen that have been particularly poignant in your personal kind of and professional experience in this?
I think it's that, look, I think we can all try to strive to be independent problem solvers, right? We can do this. And particularly in America, we'll pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and we'll, just get this done on our own because we're independent. Well, the reality is that everybody needs to ask for help at times. And for adoptive parents, perhaps, to feel like I've got to fix this myself, or someone else will think I'm a failure as a parent. Or if I reach out and try to get an answer to a question or a problem solved, someone will think I'm inadequate as a parent. And we make sure that we share with parents every day that reaching out is a symbol of strength. Asking a question to help get access to resources is something that you must do. Suffering in silence isn't going to help you. Feeling casting yourself as an inadequate or a failed parent because your child has an issue isn't going to be productive. And so we want to encourage people to make sure that they feel that they build those networks around them so that even pre-adoptive, and again, our lens is foster care adoption. So there's lots of preparation in order to adopt from foster care. Before that adoption is finalized, make sure you have those networks of support in place, whether it's family or support groups or the agency that you've worked with. Make sure that agency has connected you to networks of support. Make sure that you have a catalog, essentially, of resources of where do I go if. How do I access financial assistance? How do I access educational assistance? How do I access just someone to talk to about this parenting issue that I'm puzzled by? So I think it's that the biggest aha for me has been over the past number of years is, one, it's not only okay to ask and reach out, it should be required, because it's so trite now, but it does take a community, and a community of knowledgeable and lived experience folks that can help you through something that you don't have to suffer alone.
Yeah. Essential stuff, and so clear. So what stops parents doing that, do you think?
I think the fear of being labeled an inadequate or unprepared parent. The fear that if I learn something about my child that I didn't know before, I might feel differently about this child and I might treat them differently. A fear that it might lead down a rabbit hole of activity and steps that I'm maybe not prepared to do. I think it's fear. Sometimes, and it's okay. I mean, we all have fears inside and feelings of inadequacy. And I've raised two amazing daughters, but during part of that time, I was a single parent and beat myself up all the time, wondering if I was giving them exactly what they needed. So knowing that that's both a typical parent condition, but it's exacerbated by being an adoptive parent. And so understanding that whatever fear or hesitation that you might have, got it, but you will, if the access, the resource that you go to, you feel judged by, go to another resource, because judgment should not be part of this scenario.
Yeah. So the phrase that came to my head is I'd kind of, well, the first thing is you've talked about fear, fear of being labelled inadequate, and that was kind of I think behind that was the answer I had that I was kind of expecting, because I've kind of heard about that, and I can also relate to. So I'm a social entrepreneur. A lot of my friends run their own business, and I've always sought out a lot of coaching, right? And when I talk to my friends about me seeking out doing it, they think that I'm nuts, and that it's weak and all that sort of stuff, and they don't want to do that, and they don't want to open up. I don't know, maybe it's a more of a male thing if we just go for some gender stereotyping. So there's that, and so I can see that. So me and my wife haven't got any kids. We've just got the two Labradors and the 2 pigs. So kind of, but fear about what they might find out. I can't. That's a new one on me, and I'm thinking, well, fear about what you're going to find out. Well, you're going to find out. Hopefully, you're going to get closer to hopefully, you're going to get closer to the truth. Hopefully, you're going to get some information which you can decide to act on or not.
Yes.
And what do people say? Information is power. So you're going to have more choices.
Yes.
If you stay stuck trying to solve it on your own, then you're just going to be spinning your wheels, and you're not going to move forward. If you reach out, you can always decide to hang up the phone. You can always decide whether you're going to make another call. So that would seem to be the kind of the antidote for that fear. And an interesting one, the process ahead of us. So it's almost like parents are feeling like they're going to be on some sort of conveyor belt. They're going to be subsumed. They're going to be subsumed into a process. On once they get into this new space, they're not going to be able to get out of that, and they're not going to be. The only word that comes to my mind is they're not going to be in charge. They're not going to be sovereigns anymore.
Right.
And so it's kind of a leap of faith, isn't it?
It is. And it's about that North Star of what is best for my child, right? This may be uncomfortable for me. Maybe I don't want to deal with, gosh, now suddenly we've been referred to this process, I've discovered whatever it is about my child, and we've been referred. And so now I have to do this next step. It's taking away from what angst is this causing me to what's best for my child, and will make this in the long run best for all of us. I think it's just getting over that natural human fear or denial or whatever the barrier is, and keeping that North Star in mind, what's best for my child. And that's what I think everybody comes into it with that, but then we hit some barriers at times.
Yeah. So there may be a sense, as we're talking now, everything's crystal clear. We're not involved in the individual drama that's going on inside the listener's head about should they or shouldn't they.
Sure.
We're sitting pretty at some distance. We've got some perspective.
Yes.
And I guess that's what we're aiming to do with the podcast is to share a different perspective, to allow parents to kind of pull back and maybe see where some kind of subconscious fear or some fear of shame or fear of loss of control. I guess that's the big thing, isn't it?
I think so.
They're already feeling like they've lost control and they don't want to cede any more control. Maybe they've had some bad experiences in the past. I remember, because as I said, I've been coached a lot. I've had a lot of coaches. I've invested a lot of money in coaches. So I think initially I was a little bit skeptical about that. But I've had some good experiences with that, and I continue to be coached and mentored. But for me, when I was looking for a therapist, when I was looking to explore some stuff six or so years ago, when I already felt I was on a long way to my healing, I wasn't happy. I probably spoke to about 5 or 6. I saw 2. One of them I thought was just, well, nuts. I mean, she was supposed to be helping me become less nuts, but she couldn't share anything about her process that she was going to take me through. She couldn't share anything about herself. She didn't want to share anything about herself, but she expected me to share about me. And then what was the other one? Oh yeah, she couldn't tell me any success stories that she'd had. And she said, about confidentiality. And I said, well, I'm not asking you to name names. I'm just paint me some pictures of some stories, paint me some pictures of people that you've helped. And so, and she kind of, I think the term, I hear the term quite a lot now, not so much 6 years ago. She kind of gaslit me. So she turned it back on me. So when I said, you don't seem to be able to tell me anything about the process, what's going on, she made that like it was my problem. And the long shot of this sharing, listeners, is, as Rita says, if you're not comfortable with the people that you're speaking to, just because they've got all the names, the letters after their names,
yep.
Just because they've got this alleged experience, they may not be right for you. Might just be you got to find the right person to help you with your own personal situation.
Exactly. I think sometimes the hardest thing for some adults is to say no, thank you. Particularly, you're right, if this is an expert that has been referred to you. But again, you are your child's advocate and you are your own advocate, and you know what's best for you and your child, and you need to feel empowered to make that decision. And no one is going to think less of you if you've decided this is not the best choice for my child and for me.
Yeah. And as our kids get older, we want them to be advocating for themselves. We want them to be empowered. So we're leading, if I'm saying we're the adopted parents. So we've got to lead by example. We want to be, I don't know if it's the right word, but vulnerable enough or courageous enough to work with somebody that we feel that we can work with, and that's going to help us. And that's what we want, that's what we want our kids to be able to do.
Yes, and depending on the age of the child, being open to taking cues from the child as well. If they don't appear comfortable with this, it's that delicate balance between being adult and knowing and believing we know what's best for a child, and also allowing the child to have that voice, empowering them as well to be a part of the process when it's appropriate. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you mentioned the word advocacy. What does that mean to you, Rita? What does advocacy mean to you?
We see it a lot in education here. So a child that has for whatever reason, has been in foster care for a length of time and might be delayed educationally. And it might only be by virtue of having moved a number of times to different schools, different homes, and so got behind at a level in education. Or it may be something organic, that there are some organic needs that this child has. But in the education system, it's very tough here to get individualized plans for children. And so that's one example of a parent needing to be very, very vocal at times with the school, being very vocal with the system, looking at what policies and procedures exist that I can make sure respond to the needs of my child. So being that vocal advocate for a child. Just one example is educational needs, but it might be medical needs. It might be access to extended family members. If those family members are safe for that child, making sure that there are no barriers, or even being that barrier. If there are, folks in that child's life that are not good for that child, then advocating for that child to keep that separation. So it comes in a lot of ways, but we see it a lot in the education system. We also see it a lot in terms of financial assistance with families here. Subsidies follow children who are adopted out of foster care, but unfortunately the states and the counties within the states tend to think of those dollars as theirs as opposed to dollars set aside for families, and they literally have to negotiate for those dollars. It's shameful, but it happens. And so being a financial advocate for the resources that were set up for these children so that they can be at their best advantage when they've been at a disadvantage for a number of years in foster care. It happens in a number of ways. And then really just advocating for the safety, health, and welfare of this child, emotional safety, health, and welfare, making sure that, again, as we talked about earlier, that understanding of everything that has gone on in this child's life becomes a platform for making sure that everything that is important for this child to continue to grow is in place.
Yeah. What comes to my mind is if I look at the kind of the finding a therapist bit,
Yes.
conversation we had five minutes ago, and this advocacy thing is that there's some similarities in terms of our we're dealing with authority figures, and those authority figures are going to be I think that we're going to sometimes see them as having power.
Yep.
Power over us. So we've got, and here in the UK on this, you talked about medical needs. The GPs. So in here in the UK, we have this public health system which is free. Free at point of access, right? So it's paid by tax pounds. So the receptionists are on these that work in these local groups of what you would call MDs, general practitioners. So there might be 3 or 4 GPs in an office, in a surgery with a couple of nurses and a couple of admin people. These receptionists are they're the gatekeepers.
Yes.
They're the gatekeepers, and you kind of like, and their job is to try and brush us off. To oh no, we can't do that. So for me, one of the biggest things is not just our courage. It's actually all about our persistence.
Yes.
And not being fobbed off. Bearing in mind that a lot of these people working in GP surgeries, MD surgeries, and the sorts of people that you're talking about here within the education system, with the health system, they're really overstretched. So and overworked, and they're struggling too. So we have to make sure that our case is the kind of the top of their priorities, that we don't slip down their list. And we have to, the advocates, persistence in, there's a mindset thing, there's a realization that they might try and look down at us, or we might have some stuff from our past where we have been felt marginalized by a teacher when we were a
Yes.
kid and put
Yes.
down by then. So that might be playing for us in our dealings with our with our kids teachers. So there's a power thing going on, but there's also a persistence thing
Yes.
going on.
Yes.
What other issues do you see? What other barriers do you see to adoptive parents not securing the what their kids and what their families are deserve? What other barriers are there from your experience?
Again, the barriers are profound. I think, particularly when it is access to financial resources, the financial resources that exist. Look, literally, it costs nothing to adopt from foster care, but the costs that are embedded and there is a system of healthcare that's provided for kids that were in foster care, but frequently the needs supersede or exceed what is provided. And so it's a complex, it's 50 different states, and within counties or within states. For example, in Ohio, there are 88 different counties, each of which operate independently in terms of rules and regulations. So that navigation of systems, I think, is one of the largest barriers of understanding what the systems are, understanding where the entry points are, and understanding where the assistance is to get through those navigation barriers is so sometimes overwhelming, even pre-adoption and post-adoption. But it frequently hinges on access to resources. If there are additional therapies that a child needs, if there are additional educational requirements this child needs, getting a child into college, and understanding where sometimes those waivers for free assistance in college exist, and then making sure you're on the list and you've got the timeline down to get on that list. They can be profound, and it's almost as if it's a system set up to fail. And that's where that sense of advocacy comes in. I hate that parents have to feel like they're constantly triaging a system in order to figure out what's most important, what's critically important, what's important, and what can be put on the veritable back burner while I get these first two critically important things done. So, it's a system that's complex, that sometimes feels unable to be navigated. But I think that persistence that you talked about, the advocacy and understanding that there are ways in, and there are organizations and groups and individuals that have navigated it successfully and are set up to help with that navigation.
Yeah. So you're back to that point about the network that people have.
Yes.
That can help them help them to shortcut. And the shortcut that we're talking about is, how do we navigate this system?
Yes.
Rather than having to, it is, shortcut. We are looking for a shortcut, rather than having to go up our own learning curve about how we access these this assistance. And something that I've been very aware of in the past of what you do as a foundation, and people might not be aware of this, is because you've done a lot of work and you continue to do the survey of employers, don't you? So you do adoption friendly employers, and so lots of firms, large and small, are on your list of adoption friendly workplaces, and it includes universities, from my recollection, as well as corporations. And they are, a lot of those organizations are offering support to.
Yes.
Now, I don't know to what extent adoptive parents are aware of that, which is kind of why I'm flagging it. And it's, as always, listeners, there's a link to the guests' podcast, the guests' website and their social, their social media channels in the show notes. So if you're thinking, well, is my employer offering support? Have a look on there. Talk to your boss. Talk to your HR colleagues in human resources, and dig and see what's about.
Exactly. And that includes financial assistance. It includes paid leave, or if it's a very small organization and, whatever the budget allows, at least that recognition of time, not only for adoptive parents, but for parents that are fostering, because that
Okay.
need for time is critical. So we encourage employers to if you provide benefits to families that are formed through birth, it feels only equitable to provide benefits for families that are formed through adoption. And then corporations and universities and non-governmental organizations go beyond that. And frequently, once they get into that and realize this is important for my employees, then they may have educational sessions for employees, or parent support groups for especially large corporations. There are lots of folks who have adopted, and that begins to develop that natural additional network where you can learn from others as well. So it's an important program, that's just a small piece of what can we do to provide support for adoptive parents. And the workplace, where many of us spend most of our day, is one of those areas.
Yeah. I mean, I've been doing some parent webinars through employers. So more and more companies are getting involved in this, and then I'm sure this is the same in the States. They're doing like support through infertility as well.
Yes, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
The
Right.
often is the
Right.
the
And it's
precursor.
not just about foster care adoption. It's about all kinds of adoption, about
Yeah.
infertility, about whatever it is. I think for a business to declare themselves family friendly means there are lots of ways to prove that, not just to say it.
Yeah. So I'm looking back at what we talked about right at the start. We've talked a lot about access to resources. We talked about understanding the dynamics.
One of the things, Simon, that we've supported for a number of years here, and I don't know what it's like in the UK, but for families that need to have additional counseling assistance, therapeutic assistance, it's one thing to get a therapist for general needs, but it's critically important to find a therapist that is adoption competent, that does understand the dynamics and the issues behind children and families that step into this, the children who've been adopted and families that step into it. And through the foundation, we've provided, because again, we're a grant making organization and we support other organizations, we've supported an organization that has developed a robust and evidence-based adoption competent mental health provider curriculum, and trains mental health providers in the dynamics of adoption. So I think as people, again, are reaching out, a good question, if you feel like a counselor is something that your family needs, or a therapist, one of the first questions is, help me understand your experience with adoptive families. Help me understand your competency in this conversation, because it's like going to a general doctor for a heart condition. You want a heart specialist. If you're going to a therapist, you do want somebody that understands what you're experiencing.
Yeah. Well, what's that organization that you
It's the Center for Adoption Support and Education.
Right.
CASE.
Yeah, CASE. Yeah. Well, funnily enough, I did yesterday. I released the episode with
Debbie Riley.
With Debbie,
yeah, she's a good friend, and we've worked together for a number of years, and she does amazing work. And it's such a critical piece. It feels like one tiny piece, but it's not. It has such profound impact in the systems to have that kind of resource at hand.
Yeah. So I'm going to put a link. I'm just making a note to myself. So in the show notes, as well as the link to Rita's website, I'm going to put a link to Debbie Riley's interview, so that if you want to find out more about what they do, because she's a professional like yourself, and she's also an adoptive mum. So she knows her onions on this stuff. So if listeners, you want to check out what Debbie's about, then have a look in the show notes and listen to her episode too, because that was great. Is there anything more that you want to share in terms of this understanding the dynamics of the adoption?
I think we've hit on most of the key points, Simon. It's just that, critically important is self-care as well as a parent. It can be exhausting to be a parent. No matter what, no, not can be, it is exhausting to be a parent at different stages of a child's life. Certainly through COVID, and this is becoming a very complex world. The complexities of parenting in this world today are tough. The complexities of parenting an adoptive child can add a different layer of challenging. So self-care is critically important. It's not selfish. It's important. And if there's nothing else that we talk about today, I think taking care of yourself, identifying where your edges are that you need to step back and take a minute, take a day, take whatever it is that you can do to become a refreshed and restored parent is so important.
Yeah. There's that old analogy and bit of advice about, you heard this one, putting your own oxygen mask on first.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so like when we're getting on a plane, the safety briefing is always about putting our own oxygen mask on first.
Yes.
Because if we're depleted, then we're not in the best place to give the energy and focus that we need to do for our kids.
And the world will wait while you take a pause. It will be okay.
Yeah. People have adopted parents afraid of that stuff.
I know.
Afraid of
They are. And it's okay. It's okay to pause. It's okay to whatever makes you feel best, whether it's a hot bath or a walk around the neighborhood or a couple of days somewhere else, your family will be fine. And that's that importance again of having that network around you, whether it's family or friends or faith-based community or an adoptive family network that you've found through other resources. The importance of that network will help you with that self-care.
Yeah. I guess for me, this isn't just, it's the whole body mind system, isn't it? That we often we go to sleep with a problem on our mind, and then we kind of wake up and it's no longer on our mind, and then bingo, the insight hits us, the solution hits us, because what's happened is the problem's been on the back burner of our brain, and a bit of distance from the problem, a bit of has given us a perspective to figure out how to solve it. So the self-care idea, to me, also accelerates that perspective.
Absolutely.
It brings us the insight. When we've got a breather, then we're more likely to come up with a way forward, rather than stuck in the middle. It's like trying to remember somebody's phone number, isn't it? I guess they're all in our mobile phones. But it's like trying to remember somebody's name, and then it comes to us later when we don't need it, when we're grinding the wheels trying to figure out the answer. It often doesn't come to us, but then once we step away from it, then it somehow magically appears. So is there, conscious of time, is there anything what's the question I've not asked?
I think just a little bit of clarity about who the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is. We have both a foundation in the United States and in Canada, two separate foundations. Again, we're a national nonprofit public charity. So our goal is to, and we have a singular mission to dramatically increase the adoptions of children in North America's foster care system who are waiting to be adopted. And we focus almost exclusively through all of our activities, our awareness activities, our service activities, through that population of children and youth who are most vulnerable in the system. Older youth, children in sibling groups, children with special needs, children, and this one makes me sad, still to this day, children who have been in a system for so long that they've given up on themselves, they've given up on family, and they don't believe that they deserve family. And so all of the activity that we do is surrounded by that notion that every child deserves a safe, permanent, and loving home. Every family deserves the support that we can give them when they do step in and choose to adopt a child. And that sense of honoring families in all of their complex and variety of forms is critical to the work of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption.
Yeah. So how do you see this changing going forward? What's obviously we've heard this this Supreme Court stuff last week. So we're recording this on 28th of June. So how do you see your role changing going forward?
Yeah, that's still to be seen. There are such inequities in this country in terms of that access to resources in so many ways, healthcare resources for women of color, of poverty is profound in so many areas of this country. And so it remains to be seen what happens given Supreme Court decisions, what happens to women and babies, and will there be an influx? And I'm getting calls by reporters all over the place. Do you think there's going to be an influx of babies in the foster care system? I don't know. Babies tend to get swept up. We find through our research that families prefer to adopt infants rather than older youth, of course. And so they tend to find their way into families a little bit quicker than older youth. So we'll keep eyes on. We'll continue to advocate for making sure that the system is fair and equitable and without racial injustice. But we've got a long way to go.
Yeah. So is there anything else that you'd like to share as we close?
Just that I am so grateful for families that are formed through adoption. I honor those families every day. I have such profound respect for children who have been adopted, whether it's infant adoption, international adoption, step-parent adoption, or foster care adoption. It is a dynamic that is still unexplored in a way. And that voice of lived experience is so important to us to continue to learn from those who have experienced adoption in all of its incredible forms. And that the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption simply stands ready to partner with as many individuals and organizations as possible to make sure that every family that wants to adopt has easy access into that process, and every child that's waiting to be adopted has the opportunity for a permanent home.
Yeah. Just a last thought on that. I talked about the adoption-friendly employers already. And about and it's great work that you're doing in this area. I don't see anything like this in the UK. I think it's fantastic. I really applaud that. And we talked about it from a perspective of adoptive parents finding out whether they are whether their employers, whether it be a corporate, an NGO, or university, are already working with yourselves. I'm thinking the flip side of that, if they're not, if you're an adopted parent and you want to help other adopted parents, then find out whether your employer is already engaging with the Dave Thomas Foundation. And if they're not, get them to get in touch.
Yes.
Obviously the URL, the website address is going to be on the show notes. Get the HR people, your HR colleagues, to get in touch with Rita's colleagues, and let's build this together. Let's get it snowballing, and let's do everything that we can to move this agenda on, because as you say, it's unexplored.
It's great, and it should be business as usual. And we've got toolkits on the website, so it's easy for employers to implement benefits. We know it's cost effective. It's not every employee that's claiming benefits, and so it's cost effective. Most importantly, selfishly for employers, it provides a sense of goodwill. And and particularly in today's job market, where all employers, at least in the US, I don't know if it's the same in the UK, are scrambling to find employees. If an employee has a choice between two pretty much the same businesses, and one provides adoption benefits and one doesn't, they tend to go where those benefits exist. So it's good for everyone. It's good for the employee. It's good for the employer. And it just makes a statement that this is just the right thing to do. It's exactly what should be done.
It is. I think here in the UK, our vacancy levels have never been as high.
Yeah, same.
So,
exactly.
So it's it's part of that corporate social responsibility agenda
Yes.
that keeps
Yes.
on moving on. And so if you're listening, adoptive parent, then find out what your employer is doing, and if they're not already engaging with the Dave Thomas Foundation in Australia, in the US or in Canada, then get them to start the ball rolling. As Rita's saying, there's a simple toolkit on there. So there's it's clearly a well thought out process. And I mean the survey that you've been running for years, there's hundreds of organizations that have been involved with this. So I think that's really fantastic, the way that you're doing that stuff.
Great. No, we appreciate you highlighting that, and it's just important. It's important that we all understand that look, adoptive families are as common as birth families. That we all need to understand the dynamics, the fact that our colleagues probably have adopted if they haven't talked about it. We've got extended families that have come together through adoption. It's part of the human experience. It's always been part of the human experience. We're just willing to talk about it more and encourage it and support it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Rita, and thank you to listeners. We will speak to you very soon.
Thank you.